Thank you for coming to Living Web Farm's cooperative effort with the Food Co-op for a cooking class. Living Web is a nonprofit, and our mission is to offer alternatives, pathways to the future. So we teach classes in how to grow things, how to save energy, how to make energy in ways that are sustainable. I'm Pat Battle.
I'm Meredith Leigh.
And we're going to be your teachers tonight. We're going to kind of tag team. And we're always overly ambitious. We're actually going to try and show you 2 different recipes and talk about stuff too. And before I get started, I want to say that the concept for this class, Vegetable Roulette, is just that if you have a garden or you shop at the farmer's market or you have a CSA, you don't really have control of ingredients. If you're dedicated to using local food, it's just what's coming down the pike. You know, right now we are rolling in cauliflower, broccoli, sugar snap peas. So I'm going to take you through 2 different recipes that use mostly those, and summer squash, mostly those ingredients. And they're very different recipes. And the idea is that you can have the same ingredients and go many different ways so you don't get bored with the same ingredients that all come in. You know, another example was 2 meals this weekend. You know, it's always vegetable roulette. It's always the same vegetables. It was quinoa with all of those vegetables I talked about, and Oriental seasoning for Sunday night. And then for Monday afternoon, my last meal in Silo, it was cauliflower and broccoli and squash with polenta, sage and marjoram, and just a teeny bit of tomato and a teeny bit of cheese. And so it went more Mediterranean. But it can just go any of those ways with the same vegetables. You know, garlic. I mean, garlic scapes goes in everything right now because we're rolling in garlic scapes. You know, that's kind of the way we do it. So you really are, it's kind of a gamble, and that's the idea of the title. And so you really have to be able to roll with it and figure out how to make whatever you got be interesting and not boring, because if you're committed to eating locally, the vegetables don't change. You can't go to the supermarket and grab, you know, not that we don't use other ingredients from supermarkets, but our goal is to try and use mostly what we grew. My way of doing it is, I think, how do I feel? Do I feel like I want to have Asian food? Do I feel like I want to have Mediterranean or German or whatever? And I can go with it. And sometimes, you know, you can actually use things that were meant for something else in a different way. Like I brought 2 condiments to go with the curry I was going to demo tonight. One is fermented beets and other things fermented with ginger, fermented garlic tops, and that's going to work fine with curry. The other thing was actually caponata, which is a way to preserve eggplant and celery, and it's a very strong celery flavor. And the herbs are really Italian, but it doesn't matter. You can put that on the side with curry, and it's just so exotic, such an exotic flavor, really strong with celery. The eggplant works well with curry, that it just adds to it. Just like if you go out to a fancy Indian restaurant, you'll get these little things with strong flavors. And so you can just make some of those things, and you can actually use them many different ways. So tonight, the first one that I wanted to demo is, and actually, just the way it's carrying it, came out actually very pretty. That's just because I wanted to carry it that way. This is a huge favorite of Diane's and mine, and you served it at Penland several times too. It was very popular there too. And this is a way to, every time that our cauliflower and broccoli comes in on the farm, we always have this at least once. And we hope for a long enough season that we won't be bored with having it more than once. And this is a recipe from this cookbook here. One of my favorites. You can see it's been used for a long time. It's quite beat up. Deborah Madison's Greens Cookbook. The first cookbook celebrating the restaurant in California. That restaurant, by the way, you needed 3 months for a reservation. It was an all vegetarian restaurant. She was the initial chef there. And this is why, the recipe is why, it's in your thing, is pasta with cauliflower, broccoli, and mustard butter. She calls it wide green noodles with broccoli and cauliflower and mustard butter because she made the noodles. I've never yet done that. I'm sure that it'd be even more amazing. The noodles are supposed to have lots of herbs in them, be very exciting, but I just never have time. So I just do it this way. So what we're going to do right now is this has all been pre-cooked. It's with this one you want to, and we have some fun stuff in here. We have cheddar cauliflower. I don't know if you all know that one, but it's that color when you grow it. What's in here is the water that I cooked the pasta in, and then the cauliflower and the broccoli went right into that water and cooked in it as the pasta was finishing. And then I took some of that water and soaked sun-dried tomatoes, and then the water left from soaking that went back into it. Then I made potatoes for the curry dish that I'm going to demo, and I cook that in the same water too. So basically, just by saving the water as I'm cooking, I made a very rich stock, which was my backup plan if we had vegans here, because I was going to make a milk-based curry sauce, but since we have some vegans, in your honor, we'll use the remaining stock and make that curry sauce. And so that's just a good trick to do, to just concentrate those flavors as you're cooking. Don't throw that water out. There's a lot of minerals in the vegetables that end up in the water by saving it. And indeed, there are minerals in the pasta too. So by saving it, you're getting a little more nutrition. So this stuff doesn't really need any more cooking at all. It just wants to be warmed up. And so this recipe is pretty unusual. It's not surprising. Deborah Madison's a very creative chef. In that the sauce is made with stock. Basically, the sauce for this one is butter and breadcrumbs, stock, and mustard. And that's how you make the sauce for this one, which is pretty creative and pretty effective. It's not really creamy like a cream sauce, but the breadcrumbs do carry that flavor. So it works. And it's important to know, by the way, that if you're inclined to think, oh, I can jam on this and just toast bread instead of making breadcrumbs, that does not function the same. You cannot create instant breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs have to actually go through that staling process and be breadcrumbs. Toast will be nice and dry on the outside, but it won't have that same absorbing capacity for flavors and stuff, and it'll be more mushy. And I should inform you that although I'm going to attempt to stay close to the recipe tonight, this is the kind of thing that I've cooked for so long that I never measure a thing. You know, I know all the ingredients, I throw them in there. And in the recipe, in the book, it says to use either parsley or arugula. And a note that I have is both, and lots of both. That's my favorite. We couldn't find arugula, so it's just going to be a bunch of parsley that's going to go in it tonight. But it's very best with lots of parsley and arugula. So I'm going to brown the breadcrumbs, saute the onion, chop some parsley.
I'm pretty passionate about sharp knives. This is a pretty cheap one. This is like, I want to say a $20, $25 NSF, which is commercial grade chef knife. And you can start with something like this and keep it pretty darn sharp. It's absolutely more dangerous to use a dull knife than it is to use a sharp knife. Should have brought my honing steel so you could see it, but I sharpen knives for people, for money, also for trade. I use an oil stone, but I always try to make sure that people have a honing steel. You ready for this now? Yeah. So that
you might be tempted to push the onions in that way. Use the back of the knife always. You'll keep your knife a lot sharper, a lot longer. Go ahead, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
That's okay. So honing is basically, even though you can't tell in a chef knife, your knife's blade is made of a lot of tiny little teeth. And when you hone it, you're just bending those teeth back in alignment. When you sharpen it, you're actually shaving metal off and recreating that edge. So that's why it's important to keep it honed and sharpen only when you need to. And the key with using the steel, pretend this was, you guys have probably all seen a honing steel before, it just looks like a big metal stick. And the key to it is just finding the right angle. So if this is 90 degrees, most knives are beveled. The edge of the blade is beveled at 20 degrees. So if you start at 90 degrees and you take it halfway, that's 45, and you take it another half, then you're at pretty much the right angle. And the easiest way to start honing is just to turn it up like this, so your hand's on the handle, and then just get that nice 20-degree angle and go back towards yourself. And when you get better, you can start doing it like this, but down on a towel is usually the best way to do it. And then you can try taking it to you know, local butcher shop like the Chop Shop. If you're ready to get it sharpened, they have an angle grinder that they use. Or you can get in touch with me at Living Web and I'll do it for you.
I didn't know you were doing knife sharpening services.
Just started, really.
One question I have, I was thinking about it. Do people do peening to recreate an edge on a knife like they do with some of the other stuff?
Not usually. I think that's mostly for blades. Like you could do that with this blade. I'm going to show this tool off later. This is my vegetable slicer. Like blades that you would use a file on, people peen sometimes, you know, and like scythes and heavy steel tools, but finer blades like a knife really are best with a stone. And really electric sharpeners, I find it's really easy to wreck your blade with them, even though they seem really cheap and easy and just pull through. I think it's better to actually learn the technique of sharpening on a stone. because your knives will last longer. Also, knives will like a wooden board better than a poly board, so it's better on your blade. And if you can find end grain wood, so this is not end grain because you can see the side of the board, and an end grain board will look like a whole bunch of rough cut lumber all turned up on its end. And then that's the best that you can get for a knife. So like the maple butcher blocks that are prized are almost always end grain maple.
Yeah, I have end grain cutting board, but it's much bigger and heavier, so this is easier to transport. A tip, by the way, I don't know if you saw my board moving as I tried to cut. Moisten a towel, put it underneath, and your board will stay put.
What do you think of bamboo cutting boards?
I think they're all right. I mean, it's a different kind of wood. It's not bad for the knives, you know. It's just not as ideal or easy to keep, you know. I find it dries out really easily, even if I oil it in splinters. So I just like to use maple when I can.
Yeah. And I don't own one, but I have several friends who have I think they're ceramic knives.
Oh yeah.
What do you think of those?
I don't know. I don't know much about those. Anybody have an opinion?
I thought they were weird.
Yeah.
When I used one, it actually worked, but it just seemed weird. I just didn't feel comfortable with it, you know. But I don't know if I mean, that's not a very professional response, but that was my...
Oh, it's not a very professional response. I've never used one before, and I wouldn't know how to go about sharpening it, so I just don't. You know, I want something I can keep, you know. You don't sharpen it. Okay. Yeah, I just want something that I can keep up, you know.
I thought you sharpened it on the back of a ceramic plate. That's what I remember hearing, is you take the unfinished glazed part of a plate, and you sharpen it on that as if it were a stone.
They make ceramic honing steels as well,
yeah.
And people use them for regular steel knives, but I wonder if they're also made like for ceramic knives. But that would be something to look up for sure.
This is the lemon peel. Of course, when you want to use organic, you want to wash it well. And then I try to use a very sharp knife and stay away from as much of the white pith as I can, because that has a bitter flavor, though it's good for you. But does have a bitter flavor. I love this the most if arugula is in season, because that just adds one more bright, strong flavor. And this is about bright, strong flavors with pretty hearty vegetables. Broccoli and cauliflower, pretty hearty vegetables. They can really. Yeah, probably 2/3 of it anyway. And then I'll put some garlic in too. I actually did consider, by the way, just because we have so many, chopping up and adding garlic scapes, but I figured I'd give you the original true concept. If I was doing it at home this time of year, I'd throw garlic scapes in it. I throw garlic scapes in everything except for ice cream.
As a farmer, when you're growing garlic, when it starts to set a flower, you want the plant to put its energy into growing the garlic corm. So you want to pull the flower off, and that's the garlic scape. You can use it just like green garlic, just chop it really finely. I take the woody ends and ferment them, and then use the rest in fresh cooking.
It is milder by far than garlic.
What did you say about the flower and the garlic and the growing?
So the plant is like an onion. The garlic that you seek eventually is underground. And the plant is distributing its energy into both creating the corm, but also reproducing seed. So when the flower starts to shoot up, it's usually like late May, early June. Then you want the plant to ignore making seed and put all its energy down into the corm, because that's what you're eventually going to harvest. So you pull, this is me thinking like a plant, right? So you pull the scape, or the flower, the unbloomed flower, off, and you can cook with it and use it just like green garlic. And then leave the plant until maybe a month later. So it's usually, what, 3 weeks after scapes come up that garlic's
really
generally...
depends on the garlic. I mean, the one we have, which is considered an early one, usually for us comes in June, but we've had years where it came in early July. You know, it just depends on how hard the winter was, how hot it is.
They say 3-4 weeks after it shoots escape up, it's ready to harvest. But again, like Pat's saying, you'll have to...
Clove that you're talking about? Harvest?
Yeah, the bulbs, yeah. If you don't do that, you can lose 30% of your size by leaving the thing make flowers.
And Meredith, you said you're fermenting the woody, because mine, I let my scapes go too long, so...
Yeah, I ferment everything. I ferment everything that I don't eat raw. I'm all about using the whole plant, so I ferment, I'm going to talk about it in a minute. I ferment fennel stalks, I ferment kale stems, I ferment garlic scapes. And generally, I didn't put this in your sheet, but just a general ratio is 5 pounds of vegetable matter, any type, to 3 tablespoons of sea salt. and you can create pretty much any vegetable ferment. I'm getting a full vegetable CSA share from Paper Crane Farm here in town this year, and I live by myself with my 2 little boys. And I am able to use every single thing in my box every week without any waste. And it's mostly due to making lots of like chutneys and pestos and pea stews and fermenting a whole bunch of stuff, as well as cooking things fresh. So like just earlier today, I picked up some carrots, fennel. I pickled a bunch of the fennel bulbs. I'm putting the fennel tops. I prepped them up also with onion greens. A lot of people throw their onion greens away, but I think that's silly. So I chopped up the onion greens and chopped up the fennel fronds and stalks, and I just have them here ready to throw in a food processor for the fennel radish pea stew that's in your handout. It's almost just like a fennel or a pesto. Really the difference between a pesto and a pea stew is that pesto has pine nuts in it and cheese, and pea stew usually is not so strict. And basil is specific to pesto, whereas pea stew can be made with other greens. I forgot the food processor, otherwise I would make it for you now.
If you're going to do pesto with pine nuts, taste the pine nuts before you use them or buy them. But you may have to buy them and then say I need to taste one and then say I need to return these. But if they taste bitter, they're rancid, and I'd say that probably 75% of all pine nuts for sale are rancid. Yeah, so, and if you buy them, keep them in the freezer.
And there are other things you can ferment too. That's in the video. There's a fermented salsa recipe on the handout for the fermentation video. I'm going to serve you some of the fermented salsa tonight with one of the recipes. There's also a fermented mayonnaise. You can do all kinds of aiolis and just add whey to them, and they'll ferment, and you'll thereby get those probiotics, and it also help the product keep longer. So that's a lot of the different ideas there. What do you need, Pat? Anything?
I think this is about time to serve, actually. Okay. So I didn't talk about it as I was doing it, but I showed you the pre-soaked sun-dried tomatoes. I added them in. I added mustard, and I just took 2 big wooden spoons full. I didn't measure it, but there is a recipe that tells you how much to use. And then I added some of the stock. And I'm not going to actually stir this into all the pasta and stuff because we don't have that many people here. And I like more sauce if I can get it. So we'll make just enough for everybody to get a nice taste. This is one where I never season everything really heavily with salt. So if you want, you might want to avail yourselves of the salt and add a little more. That's because I love salt, and if I were to use as much as I like, I would blow people away. If you look at Deborah Madison's cookbooks, you'll see that she often uses mustard with brassicas. It goes very well with brassicas. It also goes well with things like chicory. It goes well with stronger vegetables. Well, I came into town to shop just for this, and somehow or another, I know, it was confusion about the card as I was trying to buy stuff, and somehow some of my stuff never made it out of the cart. If I'd had the parsley with me earlier, I would have chopped up much more. I purposely use curly parsley because it allows me to use great abundances of it. And yes, it's not as flavorful as the Italian, but if you were to use as much parsley as I like to use of the Italian, you wouldn't like it. It's too strong. But the subtle flavor of the curly parsley is still a great flavor, and it's sweet. And parsley functions as a flavor enhancer. If you use it, it brightens flavors. It also functions by pulling flavors together. Basically, what letting a good complex dish sit in the refrigerator overnight, you can do with parsley immediately. So I highly recommend parsley. If you're making a soup or a stew or some kind of complex dish and it's just not coming together, you know you did it right, but it's just not what you know it needs to be. If you don't mind it looking pretty green, get yourself a bunch of parsley, blend it up with some of the liquid that's involved in the dish, and add it in.
So what I'm going to show you is I've had an abundance of lettuce, so I've been like riffing off of lettuce and trying to find new things to do with it. I've got 3 lettuce recipes in your handout. One is for grilled lettuce. You've probably heard of people grilling romaine before, but I grill just pretty much any type of lettuce and then put it in a salad that I was going to make anyway grilled, or I just eat it grilled. And I do that a lot with radicchio. I love radicchio, any type of chicory or endive, and it's really good with strong like mustardy flavors or vinegary flavors or even sweet flavors like fig or honey. And then roasted. So grilling just adds that extra smoky flavor that makes it really delicious. And I also have a recipe in there for a lettuce, like a cold lettuce soup, a lettuce gazpacho, but that was a little involved to do. So what I'm going to show you tonight is just a little lettuce taco. So it's basically the idea of using the lettuce leaves as a taco shell instead of actually using corn. So what I have in here is just a little bit of red onion and some garlic that I'm going to saute with the seitan. Is everybody familiar with seitan? Yes? No? Okay. So what it is a meat substitute, I guess you could call it. It's a popular vegetarian vegan protein, and it's made with wheat gluten, which is a really protein-rich part of the wheat. So this is, I made this. It's made with Vital wheat gluten flour, which you can buy in bulk here at the co-op, garlic, tamari, cold vegetable broth, nutritional yeast. And if you email me, I'll send you a recipe if you want a recipe. So what I'm going to do is just cube it up. And what you do is it feels like you're making bread. You just put the wheat gluten in there. It comes like flour. You put it in the bowl. You put in your nutritional yeast. You put in your veggie stock, garlic, olive oil, tamari, and then you just sort of knead it. And a lot of people knead the heck out of their seitan, but I hardly knead mine at all. I just kind of make sure it holds together, and I stretch it a little bit into a log, cut it into 3 pieces, and then simmer it for about 20 minutes in vegetable broth with a little tamari added. I cook constantly using vegetable broth or wine or beer or meat stock. I hardly ever use water when I'm cooking. I find there's no point. And when I'm going through cooking fresh foods, I always have trim. And so I just save it in a bag in my refrigerator, and at the end of the week I make a huge pot of vegetable stock. Then I can give the cooked, trim that I use for the stock to my worms in my vermicomposting bin, and then I have stock to use all week for, cooking grains or braising greens. And so I had some on hand and decided to make some seitan. So my favorite thing to do with seitan is fry it a little bit. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I have right here some all-purpose flour and some panko, just like a type of breadcrumb. And I put a little salt and pepper in here too. You can put whatever you want, a little Old Bay or any type of seasoning. There's going to be a do-it-yourself spice blend and rubs class in I think like September or October. It's going to be right here at the co-op, so that might be something that you're interested in. But I'm just going to quickly bread these, no egg or anything involved. The idea is for this to be vegan. I have brought some things to add to the tacos that aren't vegan. Like I meant to get goat cheese, but it's brie, and then we also have sour cream. So I'll just let you guys tell me what you want or don't want.
You had mentioned that you prefer to use lettuce as opposed to corn. What's it about corn that you want?
Oh, I love corn. I just like for a quick lunch or something, this is a really yummy, fresh option of something to make. Also, I deal a lot with folks who are looking at more primal diets and not wanting to use grain in their diets, and so this is a great substitute if you're on a diet like that, or if you're trying to be, a lot of people are just not wanting to use corn because it's so ubiquitous. It's in everything, and you want as much diversity in your diet as possible, so, if you can limit corn, go for it. I'm struggling a little bit with the temperature over here, sorry. But basically what I'm gonna do is just gonna brown that seitan in there. And then I have these, I usually like to use butter lettuce for this because it makes like a nice cupped leaf, but all I could find was this romaine. So I've doubled up the leaves, and basically the seitan is already cooked because it's been boiled in broth, but this is just like an extra flavor adding and texture adding step, so it'll be nice and crispy and brown. And so what we'll do is just start building these. If you want to help me, Pat.
Yep, certainly. So another reason to use lettuce instead of tortillas is simply to maximize vegetables. Now, that's probably the most important thing any of us can do for our health, is pay as much attention as possible to eating as many vegetables as possible. Less sour cream, less corn, more lettuce, more other vegetables. Which is why the garlic scapes go in everything, because we have them and they fit fine. And it's just another way to be sure that I'm eating more vegetables.
Going gluten-free, you could pull up substituting mushrooms.
Yeah, absolutely. Or meat. A lot of people are gluten-free do still eat meat, and so you can totally do just a general sausage taco or a flank steak or something like that. You could also use tofu.
Or tempeh, probably, right?
Yeah, totally.
I find myself using the smoked tempeh quite a bit. You know, I'm not a vegetarian anymore, but I was forever, and I mostly have forgotten how to eat meat. You know, it sits in my freezer and I don't remember to use it. You know, but it's real easy to reach for the tempeh. You know, I was relieved to find out that tofu was no longer a virtuous thing to eat because I was never very excited about it.
I love tofu. I still eat it, but I think, you know, not every day. Just in moderation. I think I'll be all right. Try to get the sprouted stuff if possible.
Yeah, they say that homemade tofu, they don't pasteurize it so high, so it's more consumable with your thyroid, right? It's the industrial done tofu.
And also, if it's sprouted and well fermented, then it's not.
Fermented, yeah, it's a different story. Yeah, that's the flavor of fermented I immediately like.
Where you could get fermented tofu.
I don't know where you can get it here in town, but tempeh is fermented anyway, which is why people, you know, even if it's made of soy, like it's.
Yeah, that's why I tend to go with tempeh. I find it more interesting too. I'm pretty bored with tofu, but if I fermented it, I probably wouldn't be, you know. And I actually, folks, made a mental note for the curry and forgot to do it. We have cilantro going to seed, which of course is coriander. And green coriander is spectacular in curry. So if you grow cilantro, which I highly recommend you do, even if you're not a big fan of it because it's a great food for beneficial insects, you can then avail yourself of that fresh coriander for any kind of Asian dish, and it's spectacular.
I'm gonna be making tacos later this week with some flank steak, and gonna make some chimichurri for them out of carrot tops. Carrots are in the same family as parsley. Chimichurri is usually made with parsley, but instead of going and getting parsley, which I don't have abundance of in my garden right now, I'm just going to use carrot tops. Works just fine. It's all processed up anyway in the food processor, and you can take it a step further and also ferment that. Makes it really easy to digest and adds an extra bit of flavor to it.
By the way, there are books that say that carrot tops are toxic. But lots of people eat them, and I don't notice any of them dying. And there are all kinds of things that are toxic that people eat. It's usually a question of how much.
But I think that's also, like, I was going to say this when we were talking about soy anyway. I mean, one of the things that, I mean, I riff all the time on a diverse diet, and I think that it's super duper important. Your body's an ecosystem just like nature, and the more diversity you have, the more your body can thrive. That's nature's language. That's how it avoids diseases. That's how it maintains resiliency. And I think that if you're doing that, then there's no need really to compartmentalize your diet so much and say like, oh, soy is terrible all the time, always. I can't ever have soy, or oh, carrot tops are toxic, therefore I should never try them. Your body can take in some things like that, you know, and the stronger you are and the more resilient you are, then the more diverse your diet can be. So it's just kind of like a positive feedback loop.
Another example is the FDA would warn you incredibly not to eat borage leaves, that they're in a family of comfrey and that they're toxic. And they're part of Italian cuisine. You know, always, you know, they're used in Italian, authentic Italian cuisine.
Vegetable waste comprises, I think it's like 20% of landfills, and landfills are the second highest contributor to greenhouse gases. So the more we can make use of vegetable trim in our diets, the less we're contributing to that problem overall.
So the next book going to be about fermenting salsas and such?
The book has some fermentation in it. It's not just about meat. It's definitely thinking about eating meat and incorporating meat into your diet in a way that's more ethical and conscious. It's about using the whole animal. It's about home butchery and home production of your own animals. But it's also about like the fact that meat is made better by other foods. Good sauces, ferments, sundries, sauces. And so that's kind of the idea of it. So there's a lot of like sister recipes and accompanying recipes that I think even like, you know, vegans would find interesting, because I was a vegan for 2 years, vegetarian for 8 years, and my entire tenure not eating meat was spent working on creating richer eating experiences, because I think a lot of times, especially when I was in college, like things were bland and fast, you know, and so making like nut cheeses and rich milks and really heavily herbed items, you know, and so I think that all that informs a really wholesome diet, regardless of whether you're eating meat or not, you know.
Well, and it's interesting for me. I was a vegetarian for 25 years, so I realized that I didn't really have a problem with eating animals. I had a problem with how we raise and kill the animals in America. And for fertility systems, I even wanted to have animals, you know, to concentrate minerals and stuff. And what I learned was I thought I was going to find all these easier ways to cook because the meat was going to be so rich, but I'd been vegetarian long enough that I knew how to get the flavor in without, you know. And that's why I don't remember to eat the meat, because I I don't need it. You know?
I think in general, like, I always like to say people who have trouble cooking are afraid of salt, fat, and acid. And if we were less afraid of those things, then we could make anything taste good. And a lot of people in my classes ask me what to say to people who are afraid of sodium. And the thing I say is just to eat sea salt, because it's way lower in sodium chloride than table salt, and it also has a lot of minerals. I think especially Himalayan salt is supposed to have all the minerals that are essential in the human body are present in some trace form in Himalayan sea salt. And so it's like, yeah, you can look at the FDA warnings about sodium intake, but that applies to table salt. That's what they're considering.
Well, and I'm pretty convinced it has to be genetic, because I use huge amounts of salt, and I have blood pressure that makes the doctors swoon. You know, like, oh, lovely blood pressure of a 19-year-old. You know, and I eat tons of salt, so I suspect there's a major genetic component in it. You know, great thing about curry is it'll hide the flavor, and I can use the same pan that I made the mustard butter.
Are you doing coconut milk with it?
I don't have coconut milk. I'm going to use broth. Okay, so this one here really is just a fast, simple curry. I forgot to eat curries for several years, and it was just such a joy to rediscover them. You know, they just kind of, I don't know how they fell off my radar, and I wasn't doing them. And then when I found them, it's just like really quick, wonderful flavor. You don't have to spend a lot of time. You can buy I mean, sometimes it's fun to actually make a curry powder yourself and really play with them, and, like, you know, have much more of one ingredient to use that green coriander and stuff. But they're really nice blends downstairs. They work really well. And so you can make a dish in a hurry, and that really tends to be mostly how I cook. I wish I could say that, you know, I spend a lot of time cooking, but I only spend a lot of time cooking at Thanksgiving and Christmas. That's about it. Or if we're having some special event. You know, I love to cook, but I don't allow myself a lot of time for it. So I'm going to use coconut oil instead of butter. Either one would work.
It's about 1/3 red wine vinegar to water, sometimes a little bit more, a couple tablespoons of cane sugar. And then I mixed up a pickling spice of, it looks like rosemary, black peppercorn, coriander, juniper berries, and mustard. Did I say that already? And then garlic. And I just put everything in. I put the onions, slice them up, put the onions in the jar. Then I put everything else in a saucepan, bring it to a boil, let the cane sugar dissolve, and then pour it over top, put a lid on, let it cool, and then put it in the fridge. I'm not processing it in a water bath or anything like that. Most of the pickles I make are refrigerator pickles because I just go through them, and it's not an issue. I also know a lady who just got botulism from canned carrots. Botulism exists.
So how long does it take to actually pickle it?
Oh, overnight. Overnight it'll work, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Botulism exists, but if you're doing pickles, the acidity and the refrigeration means no botulism.
That's right.
You know? A big dangerous thing to do is to preserve with oil and not get enough ascorbic acid in there, or not keep it refrigerated at all times, because then you've made an anaerobic situation, and that's what botulism thrives in. That's how to make yourself sick. You know? Well, and not to can properly is the other, you know. And that is not hard to do. You know, you can be very accomplished at it and just miss by a little bit on something.
Oh, totally. I think she'd been canning for years and years and years, and then she had a can that was bad, and she ate it. And she actually had just had a tooth, like a cap that was on a tooth, like, or a crown was broken. And that's how the toxin got into her body. I mean, a lot of times you'll eat a spore of botulism, but it won't be active, or you'll pass it through your body. But if you have a vulnerability or a place that it can enter your bloodstream, then that's when it'll actually make you sick. And so they're thinking that's actually how she became so vulnerable to it.
Well, and I think botulism is everywhere. It's on most of our foods. It's about creating the conditions whereby it multiplies and makes the toxins that make us sick.
It's just crazy because I talk about it constantly, because I talk about preserving and fermenting meats all the time, and it's like the #1 concern when you're making charcuterie and preserved meats. And so it was like astounding to me to meet somebody who had actually experienced it. But what it does is paralyze you from the waist up. And so, yeah, she said she woke up and she was seeing funny, and she made an appointment for her doctor but didn't go right away, and then she went to stay with her daughter. And she woke up the next morning and she couldn't speak, and she was short of breath, and she couldn't see at all. and she couldn't talk, and her daughter said, I'm going to take you to the hospital. And she said she wrote a note to her daughter, I'm dying, take me to the farm and let me die, I'm dying. And her daughter started to freak out, and so she said, fine, take me to the hospital, and they took her there. And she was on a ventilator. She was in the hospital for 82 days. She had to learn how to walk again. I mean, really incredible, incredible story. And she's fine now. I mean, she's getting her strength back and will make a full recovery, but that was a really intense story for me to hear as somebody who preserves food and especially preserves meat. Take it seriously, it's a real thing.
There's no guarantee. Not everybody gets botulism, it's fine. People die.
Oh, yeah.
It's not
I mean, it's pretty hard to get, I guess, today with all the safeguards that we have. And anything that's cooked to, I think it's like 110, 115 degrees is going to kill the spores. But if you're eating, isn't it 110?
Well, but the thing is, that won't help you if a can is full of the toxin. Then you have to cook it for like 20 minutes. You have to simmer it. You know, so if something has been multiplying in there, and you take it, because the toxin is what gets you. You know, it can be made, it can happen in your own body, but you can also just ingest it. So the advice that I've read for being sure, if you're not certain about canned goods, if I'm not certain about canned goods, I throw them away. I don't like canned goods that much anyway. You know, I like fresh food. But if you're not certain and you want to use it, the exception might be tomato. Then you would actually have it at just a very low boil for 20 minutes, and then you'd be safe. Yeah, you know. But if I go that far, I'm more inclined to throw it away probably and not bother.
That's one of the reasons I like fermenting. I mean, for starters, not only is it going to be way healthier for you than if you can it, but if you let it sit long enough, I mean, the acid builds up so much.
The acid will keep you safe. Yeah. Botulism doesn't do well in an acid environment. So that's a way out of it.
What it loves is anaerobic environments that are moist, you know, and so canned products that you're not intending to cook are dangerous, and meats are dangerous if we're not using nitrate, but that's, you know, in preservation. But basically, otherwise, garlic and olive oil is the big.
That's a classic. Well, and garlic butter on salad bars and stuff has had its moments. Okay, so I wanted to go to a discussion of these ingredients and talk about the other ways you would use these ingredients, because I'm going with curry with this, but these same ingredients would make a really nice Mediterranean pasta, and you might, because you have the peas, add a touch of mint into it. So you might go with like basil and oregano and things like that, but just a hint of mint. You know, peas and mint are a classic. They go really nicely together. You know, I described the polenta we had the other night. As we were eating it, Diane was like, what is it missing? There's one thing it needs. So I just rattled off things like lemon peel, you know, miso, and I finally hit bacon, and she said bacon would do it, you know. And so sometimes you do that. You make a dish and you taste it, and you just sit back and go, what do I need? And you just think of all the ingredients, you know. And if you can't come up with one, then you go ahead and get the parsley and blend it up and add the parsley, and it'll...
My thing is usually citrus.
Citrus, yeah, right. But see, it's fun to have other ones too, like bacon instead, or, you know, to not go back to your standard one. Butter is always a good one, yeah, right. Butter is very reliable. Basically, you just prep a bunch of veggies. You saute onions, right? Oh, you know what? In this bag, which I then tossed away someplace, is my ginger. It's always nice to have ginger. There it is, still there, thankfully. You saute some ginger. I would probably use more, except for this is how much I had. I thought I had more than I had. And I just don't think, for a standard home curry, I don't think you need a recipe. There's a wonderful book if you want to do really elaborate, authentic dishes. Joffrey Moldar, she was actually an actress, by the way. And she wrote a cookbook. And it's got the most authentic and comprehensive vegetarian Eastern dishes. They're just a wonderful array, you know. Also, by the way, if you're growing your own peas and you wanted to make this fancier, right before the dish is ready, you have picked yourself a bunch of pea shoots and you toss them in and stir it as you're turning the heat off. So, because if you cook them much longer than that, they're gone. You know, they're so delicate they disappear. But if right when the dish is finishing, you know, you've got the last seasoning just right, it's still hot from being on the pan, you just stir them in and then serve it. And that'll really add an elegant touch. I've got the onions translucent. I put the ginger in. I should be smelling strong ginger right now if it was cooking as fast as I wanted to, you know. I would then next go with probably the peas, because the peas are whole, you know. Now, actually, because of how many people we have, I think what I do is coarsely chop these peas. I think that'll be a little nicer. I tend not to do that at home. I just cook them whole. Okay, so pretty much rapid succession now. I just tossed these guys in. The cauliflower would probably be next.
Are those potatoes cooked already?
They are, yes. I'd be in trouble otherwise, wouldn't I? Yeah, yeah. I actually said I cooked them in the same water, remember? Yeah. Yeah, I know these things too well to count on cooking potatoes. It'd be going for 12, and I'd say, oh, potatoes are ready. We'll give that another moment before I'll toss these in. And with the curry, I tend not to measure. I tend to do it to taste, you know. So I'll add a judicious amount. I'm using 2 here, and I don't pronounce it well. How would you say this? Garam masala, is that how you?
Garam masala.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I never trust myself with any, I have enough trouble with English. Yeah. I had a friend once who quoted her father, who was a pretty famous guy, Ernest Morgan, and he said, beware of people who mispronounce words, for they are readers.
This is starting to burn now. Can I put some broth in it?
Yeah, you sure can. But just a drop, because I don't want it. And what I'll do is give you some more veggies, too. We'll get some liquid out of this.
Have you salted it yet?
Nope, but I'll do that. That'll help. Question?
Are you using more than one kind of food?
More than, yeah, I'm using the garam masala and then a curry powder. Yeah, yeah.
It smells heavily of cinnamon. This is going to be yummy.
And in keeping with the theory of eating lots of vegetables, I didn't cook nearly as much rice as I'm making vegetables. But you can learn that it's actually a good idea, and it's counterintuitive for me. I love grain. I think it's going to keep me going and stuff. But I find that if I have a little bit of grain, I don't need a whole lot of it. You know, it's satisfying, just as satisfying to have tons of vegetables with a little bit of grain. And it's actually, you're actually getting less calories, more nutrition, more vitality. You know. And we're not that good about growing grain around here. You know, that's not that easy, but we can grow vegetables really well. Now I might need to really up the curry and the salt and stuff, because the potatoes will really soak up the flavor. And then I have someplace a little bag. Oh, you know what? We're going to serve you all, and no, that's right. You're not gluten-free. You're okay. This did not come from an animal. It's just flour. I was thinking gluten-free instead. So I love the fact that I learned how to make all these really fancy sauces when I cooked in New Orleans at a restaurant where they wanted me to make a different sauce every night. And I don't have to. I can just toss some flour on top of these vegetables, which have had some oil already, and add some liquid and stir really hard, and it makes a perfectly functional sauce. And it carries the flavors and makes the curry work, you know. It's cheating. I'm sure that there'll be chefs looking at that going, they'll just wince, you know. But that's what they have sous chefs for, right? But no. This is a whole lot easier. Gets me where I want to go, which is basically a way for all the flavors to be carried and coated over all the veggies. You do want to stir really well. If I hadn't done that, somebody would have gotten a piece of broccoli with a nice frosting of flour, which is definitely not the most appetizing thing. So you want to be sure to stir well. And would you cut me some of that cilantro, and I'll toss it in at the last second. Cilantro is one of those things that you really want to add at the last moment. It's pretty ephemeral when you cook it. It goes away really quickly. I find when I make salsa that I do better to freeze some chopped up cilantro in the freezer and just add it to the salsa when I open the can up. If I'm canning salsa. And every time I've tried to cook it, it's not there when I open the can. It's gone. Great, thank you.
You have any citrus in there, Pat?
I do not have any citrus in this. Would you like me to put some citrus in this?
A little bit.
Okay.
A little bit of lemon juice.
Sure, you want to put some lemon juice in here? If we were not doing vegan, I would be putting sour cream in it, which would probably get the same thing that you were looking for, right, Meredith? Just a little bit of acid.
Yeah, I always put lime in my curry if I have it around.
We'll do it. See, this is cooking. This is how it should always be, too. You know, you want to have a kitchen where anybody in the house is like, can we do this? Can we do that? You know, everybody takes part in it. I mean, there may be signature dishes where you leave the person alone. You don't want to tread on their one, you know, the dish that they make perfect every time. But if it's a collaborative effort, it just makes it more fun.
I think I got most of the seeds out of there.
I saw a seed drop the minute I started squeezing, of course.
You want this to scoop it out with?
I got it. Okay, I think we're going to call it there. And you may well decide, oh, I would have put more curry in, and that's fine.
This is my Huck or Hauk, or however you say this man's name, vegetable slicer. I really like it. A lot of people buy those fancy mandolins that come with like 500 different parts and pieces, and there's much plastic involved, but this is just this very simple stainless steel contraption that I use for slicing vegetables. It's called the Huck, H-E-U-C-K. It's called the Huck Slicer. You can get it at Kitchen Company. It was $8. Kitchen and Company over by Target.
Sure.
And you kind of have to get the feel for it, but this little thing, this is the blade right here, and this little thing slides up and down. There's a few little grooves that it catches on. And as you're slicing on it, you have to keep your thumb or some pressure on this tab right here so that this doesn't push down. And then you can just slide your stuff over it and you can adjust it, you can create thicker or thinner. So that's what I use to create these ribbons. And typically I do this recipe on the grill, but we don't have a grill.
If you have a George Foreman grill, use the heck out of it. I will sometimes say, oh, I don't have lettuce, and take a handful of lamb's quarters, stick it under the faucet for a minute, throw it on the grill, wilt it, throw it on my sandwich. You know, you can use it for everything.
I have a dressing recipe in your handout for the grilled lettuce and radicchio recipe, but I've used the same exact dressing on these ribbons. It's basically apple cider vinegar, coarse ground mustard, olive oil, garlic, a little bit of raw honey, salt, pepper, and thyme. So I'm just going to heat these up a little bit, a couple minutes on each side. And this is not vegan, nor is it vegetarian, unfortunately. We can stuff it with other things. We can stuff them with curry if you want us to. But the stuffing that I made for this is it's a yogurt cheese-based stuffing. So I just took plain whole milk yogurt and I strained it overnight in some cheesecloth and let all the whey come out of it. And then I have added to it some beef bacon that I made from the beef short plate. It's smoked and cured. Red onion, and then some toasted pecan. And it's all mixed in with the yogurt cheese. And once those squash ribbons have either grilled or sauteed, I'll just simply line them with the yogurt cheese and roll them up, and they're just meant to be like little appetizers. I served them at a party a couple weekends ago, and they were a big hit off the grill. But you could stuff them with anything you want. Another thing I wanted to show you is that as I was prepping the ribbons, I took some of the ribbons, and it doesn't work as well with squash as it does with zucchini, but I can just kind of show you briefly. And I turned them on their sides, and then I sent them back through my slicer, and I made some squash noodles. And so I did that with just zucchini because it's a little bit, it's not as prone to like rip in this, rip this way as you're going through. And so I think what I'm going to do with this is steam them in a little bit of white wine and butter, and then I'm going to put some of that fennel radish pea stew on them, just like a pesto, and just make just a quick little dinner out of them tomorrow night. So that would be another idea of what to do with summer squash.
If I'd brought the grill, Meredith would have an easier time doing what she's doing, and we could have just stuck it, every vegetable we had, garlic scapes, broccoli, cauliflower, all of them grilled. And so lots of times I'm making a pasta and I'm sauteing some things, but things that would be more noticeable grilled, like, I really like to roast peppers, let's say, but roasting a pepper and then peeling it takes some time. If you're trying to make a meal in a hurry, you can throw it on the grill and get a similar effect without having to roast it. Onions, like say I'm just having a sandwich for lunch. Ooh, there's not enough vegetables. Slice some onion, throw it on the grill. Like I say, throw those lamb's quarters on the grill. Just get more vegetables in, and the grill is a way to do that.
I use my charcoal grill constantly. Pat thinks it's a pain, but I'm constantly smoking things, and so then I have like hot coals, and I love to smoke red onion, just like with the skin on and everything. I just throw it on the grill. I also smoke garlic whole with the papers on, and then just keep it in my fridge and pull it out, to put in anything, pasta, salad dressing, etc. If
you have a fire going, of course, then grilling it. And indeed, My fantasy is that sometime I'm going to make enough time to make myself a little wood-fired oven. And then I would bake much more bread, and then I'd have coals all the time, and I would use the heck out of them. I love the grill. You know?
Does anybody want their ribbons stuffed with something else that we've made besides the yogurt cheese? I know maybe you two will. Do you want anything else inside?
The curry or the broccoli cauliflower. Oh, you can't have the curry for the option, I guess.
Curry? Yeah. Okay, cool. If you want to know how to make the beef bacon, you can buy my book. The recipe will be in there. It's out in October. Pre-order it now, and you'll get it right when it's off the press. You can do that at my website, and I have some cards I can give you afterwards if you want to do that. And I have a notion to someday put together a Living Web Farms cookbook with all the recipes that we have used at the dinners that we've had and classes that we've done, because now all the recipes are just piling up on my computer and they're not doing anyone any good there. I've always loved food. I started farming when I was 18. I had a farm for 12 years. I raised vegetables, pastured meats, cut flowers, and was always just fascinated with the entire plant and how it, as it's working out different parts of its life, it tastes different. So like you can use the pollen, you can use the seed head, you can use the root, you can use the tuber, you can use the stem and get a different experience. And so really just by like sensory engagement with the food, you know, smelling it and, you know, tasting it, I feel like I kind of just taught myself and learned a lot of tricks from chefs that I worked with.
Some of the other recipes that I handed out include things like frittata. So that's the loser for you all, but for everybody else, frittata is a really quick way to use and just about any vegetable in the garden. If it's a real watery vegetable, you probably do want to somehow make it smallish and salt it and get some of the water out ahead of time. Otherwise, it'll be a watery frittata. But it's an easy way, though, a way around that is to add breadcrumbs. You know, we used to work at this restaurant in California, the Swallow, a collective restaurant at the University of Berkeley's Art Museum, and they had a baguette, a signature baguette, and they didn't throw any baguettes away. The ones that were stale at the end of the day, got a big pile of them, ran them through the, let them go stale completely, and ran them through the mixer with the grater thing on it, grated them all up, and they had a standard spinach frittata that had a lot of breadcrumbs in it. And it was one of the most popular dishes there.
I do the same. I just save all the ends of my bread that I make and I just let them go stale and then pulse them in a food processor and make breadcrumbs. Then I can keep them in the refrigerator. They won't like mold or go bad.
Yeah, I keep them in the freezer just because I have more room there. But that's, and they all get used for that broccoli recipe.
But I think like the frittata recipe, when I was vegan, I used a lot of frittata recipes and just took the same ingredients and instead put them inside of like a cashew cheese or something and then stuffed bread with them. And it usually turned out really well.
I think this is probably done to you.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
How come the breadcrumbs don't go bad in the refrigerator?
Well, just because the molds and the bacteria are not going to grow as rapidly at cooler temperatures.
But see, that's why I keep them in the freezer, because they definitely won't go bad in the freezer. You know.
What other recipes are in here? There's another pasta recipe with beans. We included it, I think, mostly because of the concept of eating field beans that are still while they're fresh in their pods. It's something a lot of people don't think of, but it's delicious. I love cowpeas, fresh cowpeas. And this is using cranberry beans.
Fresh cannellini is one of my favorite.
Lentils and wild greens is another one in here. Pat and I actually went on a road trip with his wife, and we had basically vegetables, lentils, and rice. And we had some cream and some oranges. And we made like the most delicious meal. We had green lentils with wild greens, and then we took beet tops and we creamed them almost like creamed spinach and added a little orange zest. And it was so delicious with the lentils. And we had some sauerkraut that you had made.
Yep.
And that was pretty much everything. But it turned out really great. And even Diane was skeptical of the creamed beet greens, but she couldn't stop eating them after. And then the other recipe is this Russian vegetable pie, which Pat can tell you more about. It's more of a traditional recipe. Really, you can take pretty much any vegetables and put them in betwixt pie crust and make yourself a pretty good meal. But this is a cabbage and sour cream.
And mushrooms and sour cream. You could leave the sour cream out. You could do it, you know, a fermented nut milk or something instead. But what makes this probably an incredible recipe is the spice combination, the herb combination. It's tarragon, marjoram, and basil, and pretty abundant amounts, and dill. And the combination, you want to eat it long before it comes out of the oven because the smell is just so enticing. and it goes very far. You know, we used to make it at the Swallow, and it would pull people in out of the courtyard. They go, "What's that smell?" You know. So the trick was to have one baking when you had one ready to serve. You know, so they'd stick around. So anyway, they're just some of the recipes, some of the concepts, but the concepts for like vegetable roulette are, you know, soups, in very huge numbers of soups that you can do. A great way to start is the Moosewood cookbook. Her soups are all incredibly reliable. They work great, and then you just go from there. But
That's Molly Katzen.
a great combination, in my mind, is greens and beans. You know, there's some classic, wonderful soups that way, really hearty, great for vegans, tons of flavor. Deborah Madison, I didn't show the other book. She is my favorite vegetarian cook, and I don't have any meat cookbooks, you know that. I just, if I want to cook meat, yeah, well, I will, definitely. You can count on an order, you know. Yeah, right. But I go online when I want meat cooked. But this one here is incredibly comprehensive and spectacular. And she has, we made it. We made way more than we ever should have. A gumbo, a beans and greens gumbo that is incredibly rich and wonderful, no meat at all. Really amazing. A great example of how you can get richness from the combination of beans and greens. So that's a way to go. Roasted vegetables is another way. You know, you can take the same vegetables that you sauteed, roast them, and just get a whole new component, caramelize them more. That George Foreman grill is another way to go, you know. Mixing up the grains, mixing up the meats, you know. I do cook with meat when I remember to, and I work on a farm, I get meat, you know. And we make great dishes from it. Like I said, I was surprised to learn that it didn't suddenly make cooking much easier because I already knew how to get flavor. But it is fun to have that texture and that different flavor. I never much make dishes with tons of meat in them. I just kind of forgot how to eat a lot of meat. You know, since I started eating meat again, I've had 2 steaks, and that's because it was with people who just had to have steak. You know, and I could make myself appreciate it, but it's just not something that interests me. I want more variation of texture, more variation of flavor. So I just as soon take that steak, and I do it all the time. I get steaks, you know, and I cut them up, and I make stews or I make pastas. I make sure that it goes a whole lot further.
Well, even though I'm a butcher, I don't eat a whole lot of meat, and I enjoy meat the most when it's used to flavor and nuance other foods. And I think that in general, people should eat a lot less of it and just eat better meat.
I think that's wonderful.
What would be the reasons that you both decided to eat meat after being vegans?
My reason really was I looked at the fertility systems, natural fertility systems, and they all include animals. Our world works with plants and animals, you know, and it is, I deeply respect all vegans because most vegans are motivated out of a sense of justice. I mean, you know, or if not justice, at least a sense that we can't sustain the way we produce animals now, and we can't. On the other hand, we cannot continue to mine minerals and grow vegetables. You know, we are looking at a phosphorus cliff that we'll be falling off. We may fall off the oil cliff first, but we will be running out of phosphorus. And you know, sources have been mining and birds, accumulation, you know, from birds. That's actually animals once again. You know, the vegan argument to this argument for eating meat, by the way, is the proper use of human manure. If we recycled all of our human manure, it would be a long time before we needed other animal manures. But since we're not there in this culture anyways, and it's made very hard, I mean, the regulations, you'd be really looked at hard if you were selling vegetables that were being grown with human manure. Good for them. Good for them. I'm a huge advocate of urine because it's much easier to prove that that's safe. You know, and it can be done safely, easily. But that was why I got back into it. And I realized I stopped eating meat because I worked at a slaughterhouse, a kosher chicken slaughterhouse, and I couldn't take what it did to the animals or the people. And I couldn't take what it was doing to me. I quit because I felt myself shutting down as a human being. And I realized that I didn't have a problem with an animal that, you know, had a really good life and a respectful death that did not create terror and did not prolong the process. You know, we're all going to die. And you know, they say there are mountain lions in the mountains, and if I hike a lot or something, I might get taken out by one of them. You know, you know, we can be any one of us could be food for something else, and so I'm kind of okay with that, but not okay with the torture of animals. And basically, I got back into it for the fertility systems. To me, the most powerful fertility systems we have are going to include animals, mob grazing, and no-till. You know, and that's something that we say a lot at Living Lab. We're pretty convinced that that is the future of food production. You know, I mean, I'm sure we could figure out a way. We'd have to work a lot harder because it's not the way our natural systems work, to produce food and do it in a way that was sustainable, not using animals, but it would be much harder. And our current use of the, of the Great Plains to grow vegetable stuff is not at all sustainable. That's going to end a lot quicker. And if we got animals back in that in a big way, it could last a lot longer. So why did you stop, go back to meat?
Well, I mean, practically I was traveling abroad, and I was in cultures where it's a gesture of friendship to offer food to others, and I was not able to turn it down. I felt like it was an act of, it was snobby, and it was my diet based on luxury. And I was spending time with people in cultures who were raising animals for milk and work and ecosystem management, and then they were killing those animals when they were culling them. And so I was learning about, managing animals and plants in cooperation instead of in isolation, and I really believe in that. And I also, just in all my learning, have cultivated my philosophy about holistic eating and a diverse diet, and believing that our bodies too require that diverse interplay. I also believe that there are ecosystems that we probably couldn't sustain without animals. Some ecosystems that are degrading right now before our very eyes, and we don't recognize it because they're ecosystems that evolved with herds. And so that's basically my reasoning of it. I think, again, everyone should eat a lot less meat, and the mechanized suffering of tons and tons of animals is absolutely unacceptable. I don't support it, and I don't eat that kind of meat. I just eat meat that's lived a good life, been afforded a good death, is butchered properly, and is cooked properly, and no one is exempt from that process. Even if you're just the end eater, if you're not cooking it properly, then you're not eating good meat. It's not ethical. So that's basically what the book's about. The book is about that journey for me, as well as how I look at it, how I tend to approach holistic thought and managing ecosystems as well as managing diets, and just examples of how to do it, how to integrate animals, and how to think about waste, and especially focused on America, because that's my experience, like how we waste vegetables, how we are skeptical of animal parts just because we don't know how to use them, and just sort of taking our awareness and zooming out a little bit instead of compartmentalizing and trying to figure out, oh, it uses XX gallons of water to raise a pound of beef, but we're not thinking about the water cycle as this whole system continuum, and how an animal that's living well might actually be contributing positively to that cycle. Defecating on the ground, allowing that soil to absorb more water, and that water then staying in the system and supporting other life forms. And the same thinking can be applied to energy cycles of nitrogen and carbon. They've found that recently there's studies actually being done on management intensive grazing, and finding that cattle specifically can sequester more carbon in the soil than a mature growth forest in a certain amount of time, which is really astounding. So these are kind of newer scientific findings. And then I think further, we can also make an argument that science and the way we do it doesn't allow us to look at our world the way we need to, because it requires us to take things apart and see how they work, when really the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So that's a lot of stuff that we talk about constantly at Living Web, and trying to get away from reductionist thought and reductionist eating and cooking and farming. And so yeah, that's kind of a little bit of the thinking.
But to me, our culture needs vegans.
Oh, definitely.
We need the conscience. We need people saying,
and
it's not okay
and we need
to do this to
empathy,
animals.
right?
Yeah.
We need empathy, big time.
We need to get it. But we need to also not demonize farmers who are feeding, people who are still dependent on meat that actually is good for the world, and that their animals have not. It's actually very easy for me to find meat that I'm comfortable with how it was raised. It's a little harder to find meat that I'm comfortable with how it was killed. And a big part of that is simply nobody's learned at the restaurants to be able to tell you. Yeah. I mean, they don't think it's important.
But they also don't, it's also heavily kind of shrouded, you know what I mean? Like, you have some general regulatory norms for how animals are handled in a slaughter facility, but unless you go and you watch how they're doing it, then you don't tend to know how,
That's how I decided I can eat meat. When I bought meat from your butchery the first time, I asked Casey, have you been to the slaughter facility? And he said, yeah, I'm real comfortable with how it happens, And then it's like, okay, I want to get some of this, some of that, I want to try all these things, And I brought not very much of anything, but corned beef, I'm going to have a Reuben with corned beef, which I'd never had, in 30 years, bacon, the things, just little bits of things for flavor. But I can do without it easily if I think that, it's not any bit of a sacrifice for me not to eat meat. If I think that the animal suffered, no appetite. I have to trust that the animal, and I've also killed my own chickens. It's not like we don't do things wrong and there's not a moment where some animal suffers, but that is life. I mean, any one of us could die a suffering death. It's the willingness of people to make a profit from suffering and to build suffering into their production system that I'm not okay with. I never want to judge somebody if they're trying their best not to cause suffering, and they occasionally do. I remember telling the Gunther, I forget his last name, the guy of Animal Welfare Approved, because I talked to him right after I had killed 40 chickens, and I said I had 2 that I could tell I didn't get it right. And he said if everybody, cared as much as you did about the 2 you got wrong, they would feel like they were totally successful. And so that's the ethic I want to see. I want to see people thinking that it's their responsibility to ensure that the animal was treated in a way that caused it as little suffering and terror as possible. And I think that includes, I think you probably agree, not letting them experience what's happening to the other ones. I mean, when I worked at the slaughterhouse, they were on a wall. There was a wall of chickens watching what was happening. And you could look at them and note they all knew totally what was happening, and they're utterly terrified. I'm pretty convinced that Picasso, when he painted Guernica, went to a slaughterhouse for the images, because that's what I was reminded of when I saw that wall. It looked like I was looking at Guernica.
I've been involved in the slaughter of pretty much every animal that people typically eat. It's never easy, it's not supposed to be, but there is a way to do it. I believe I have watched many animals die an easier death than I will. And I think, that's something that more people should experience, or at least hear about. It doesn't have to be horrible,
But you don't have to eat meat either. There's lots of great ways to eat without eating meat, that's for sure.
So are there any questions about the recipes? Or
any thoughts, any area that you thought we were going to cover that we didn't cover as far as what to do with vegetables this summer, this winter? We didn't really talk as much about winter vegetables.
Well, we're going to do that in September at the Hendersonville Co-op. We're having another roulette in September.
Okay. All right, good. So then come on down there and we'll be looking more at winter vegetables. Brussels sprouts, one of my favorite, rutabagas, all of those are just another world of foods. Any comments?
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.
Quite a feast you put on here. I'll look forward to the next class.
All right. Well,
Great.
Thanks for coming out.